Alright everyone, so I'm just gonna make a video that hopefully exposes those people who still for some reason trust Alex Jones. This was one of the videos that really woke me up to him. It's really interesting because David Duke does know a great history about the Jewish takeover of the West, and for those of you who, when you hear that, you just, oh, that's just too unbelievable, I can't believe he's saying that. Well, throughout history, there's always been a small group of people, whether it be the Romans or the Greeks or the Mongols or whoever it may be, but the Persians, it always tends to be a small group of people that get together and they end up taking over large portions of land and territory or whatever you want to call it, and governments. And essentially, it's not just purely all these people. It's like I said, it's not. When the Romans took over, do you really honestly think there was enough Romans to take over all of the East and Western Europe? No, they obviously got other people from other places to help them out. They enslaved people. They bought off people. They did all kinds of things to get to their power position, and then when they got to their power position, they took advantage. And that's what's happening now. Ever since the 1900s, the Jews have gathered a large amount of wealth, and it's not all the Jews, but it's the top prominent ones, and they've essentially taken over. And that's basically it. They're essentially the leading group. They're the Romans. They're the new group that's, except for the thing is, they're not the actual ones, whereas the Romans actually did go out and fight their enemies themselves. These people stay in the shadows. They've found a way to basically perfect it without having to actually be blamed themselves, because they pay off everybody else to do it. Whereas, like I said, the Romans would do that, but they would also themselves be there and be doing all these things, and they would be the people in the positions of power. Whereas the Jews, they only put one or two of their people in positions of power, and they just have them scattered throughout random other positions. So you don't really notice it. Like in the media, nobody notices it in the media because nobody really researches who controls the media. They really don't. And now that we've established that, so this is one of the videos that really woke me up to Alex Jones and how much of a controlled opposition shill he is. So David Duke went on here and he debated him, man. He absolutely shredded him. And it's funny too, because there are two things that I didn't really like about Duke's contentions on this. One, at the end, if you'll notice, Alex Jones brings in one of his Jewish staff members, which maybe this guy really is just ignorant and he's just trying to defend his people, whatever. Let's just give him the benefit of the doubt, but I don't think he is. He said that, well, only one of the people who helped establish the Federal Reserve was Jewish. Okay. That doesn't matter. Who was the person who came up with the idea? Who was the main backer of it? It's not like all these people were equally backers of it. All of them equally came up with this idea. There had to be somebody who came up with this idea, who started it. Maybe it was a group of them. And if you further research into it, you find out that Mr. Paul Warburg, the only Jew of the group, was the main backer of this. He was the one who came up with the idea. He wanted it based on a European central banking system. And he essentially had to compromise once he got all of his other cronies to come together and help him out, his other Goyim bankers, if you want to call them that, non-Jewish bankers. But he was the main driver behind this. And it's funny because even Wikipedia, which is a god-awful site, let's be honest here, but even Wikipedia has a source citing that he was one of the main backers, because you can go and research this. He really was the main driver behind this. And I'm going to include an article in here too that shows that. Actually, let's just show you. I'm going to show you the Wikipedia page that claims that he was behind it. Oh, no, that's not the right one. Right there. Alright. Look at this. Look at that. One of the things... Oh, what? What? Was that Paul Warburg? Oh, okay. Let's just go down. Oh, yeah. And then also, too, I might as well include this in there. He was also one of the main financiers of the October 1917 revolution. Obviously, the Jewish socialist revolution. And people are going to say, well, how are you saying it's another Jewish conspiracy? Well, it's pretty obvious the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks were both Jewish. Those groups came about by socialism and the absolute repression of the Jews by the Tsarist Russia and Russia in general for hundreds of years. I mean, it goes back a while that they kicked out the Jews a couple times. They put them in ghettos in the 1800s all the way up to this point. So it's pretty obvious that the Jewish people in Russia were very disillusioned with their government. And how much more perfect could it be to take over a government than to have a group of disillusioned people take over? And they just so happened to be the group that came into power around then. So Jacob Schiff and Paul Warburg essentially helped finance them. And so did Paul's brother. I think it's Max. Max was actually one of the main financiers besides Jacob Schiff and Paul. But Max was actually out of Germany, so everybody knows that story, that he essentially helped get Lenin into power. And you can look this up, I'm not lying to you, please look it up. And don't just trust me. But look at this. Even on Wikipedia, they have this. Warburg became known as a persuasive advocate of the central banking in America. Many of his contemporaries regard him as a chief driving force behind the establishment of America's central bank. Wow. Hey, Jewish staffer on Alex Jones. Have you ever researched into this, or are you just going on body count because there's not that many Jews that helped come together to make this? That's your contention? That's what you're trying to say, is just because there wasn't enough Jews in there? When he was the main person who created this was his brainchild? So I'm going to include, obviously this, I'm going to include this other article that talks about how he was the main crusade, and this was in 1989, and it was really interesting to read because they actually have a good amount of history in here. And it's funny because they don't even mention that he was born Jewish, and they mention like how he was born and stuff like that and where he grew up, but they don't mention that he was Jewish and that he left because of the National Socialism and all this other stuff. But yeah, and I don't even think they mention his brother in this, but they do mention Jacob Schiff, so which is also good. But yeah, and then also too, if you don't believe me about the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks, about how the Jews were disillusioned in Russia, and that's essentially why this revolution happened, look that up too as well. The Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks eventually, the Mensheviks were even less of a majority than the Bolsheviks, and the Mensheviks essentially just merged with them, and they became one group. And they essentially just took over in 1917, like I said. So, yes, that revolution was a Jewish revolution. It may have eventually, after a while, filtered out some Jewish people, especially by the mid-1950s and 60s. It was mainly, most of the Jews had left. They'd gone to either Israel or the United States, so, but yeah. I just wanted to show this to you. Watch the debate, all you Alex Jones fans who for some reason still believe him. And keep these two things in mind that I told you about, how the October Revolution was a Jewish revolution and how Paul Warburg was the main backer and the main developer and advocate of the Federal Reserve System, and he was a Jew. So that's just fact. If this guy doesn't want to accept it, that his people are very powerful, and there's only a few of them that are very powerful, but they're very powerful. And if they don't want to accept it, it's just like people who are in denial of reality. I mean, really. It's like if your brothers and sisters take over a government, you shouldn't just sit there and just deny it. Just be like, yeah, well, just because they're corrupt doesn't mean that I'm corrupt. Fine. That's awesome. Thank you. Speak out against them. Say, this is a Jewish conspiracy, but no, you want to suppress it. No, it's not a Jewish conspiracy. It's all this random other nonsense. It's like Alex says, it's a cabal of all these random different people. Well, there has to be people in charge of this cabal. It can't just be a random group of amalgamated people who are out for their own interests. There has to be an interest up top and people directing them to do this and getting people to come together to do this. So look at these articles, look at what I told you, investigate. Don't believe anything I said. Look it up. Thank you.